Christianity offers something which is joy even when life throws you a curveball. Even when life is difficult, it says it's possible to experience joy in the midst of the refining fire. Christianity took joy and placed it center stage into the good life, not just as a byproduct, but as something we should pursue, something we should expect, and something which is intimately bound up with living life well. In other words, to live a life that enriches the world is to live a life that also enriches you and is joyful. Now let's look at why that is and how we achieve it. We're going to think about this three ways from this great passage from 1 Peter. First of all, we're going to look at how Christian joy is different, how it's different. Secondly, how it can be experienced. And then thirdly, where joy is located. So how is it different? How can it be experienced? And where is it located? Let's think first of all at how Christian joy is different. In the ancient world, and still today, there are broadly two dominant approaches to pursuing happiness or pursuing joy, as you might think of it. In the ancient world, they were really framed by two Greek philosophies. One was called Epicureanism, the other one Stoicism. And actually, they're pretty relevant today, and they've both made a comeback today. So Epicureanism is this view founded by Epicurus, the Greek philosopher, that there is no world to come, this life is all there is, and therefore, the most important thing is to try to find happiness and pleasure in the things of this life. So Epicurus said, we must therefore pursue the things that make for happiness, seeing that when happiness is present, we have everything. But when it is absent, we do everything to possess it. Hear what he's saying? He's saying, look, if this life is all there is, then the most important thing is to find the things that make you happy. So you pursue the things that are going to be pleasurable to you and avoid the things which are going to be unpleasurable to you and don't bring you happiness. Paul actually summarizes this in 1 Corinthians 15 when he contrasts it with the life of the Christian. He says, they say, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. In other words, get the maximum happiness out of life now because there's no tomorrow. So you do you. You be satisfied. You pursue what makes you happy. And as long as you're not kind of causing problems for other people, then you just go about that. That's broadly Epicureanism. But a number of people kind of tried that philosophy in the ancient world, and they realized it doesn't really work because actually the things of this life are really uncertain. So you can have a philosophy that says, well, I'm going to just pursue the pleasurable things of life. But then the reality is that the things of this life are really unstable. They rise and they fall like the tides. Your moods change with the seasons or even on a daily or hourly basis. And the things you think are going to make you happy one moment fail to satisfy the next moment. And so in contrast to that arose Stoicism. And Stoicism was the view that there is no happiness to be found in this life, that that's all an illusion. And so you need to focus on the one thing you can control, which is your inner life. And so therefore cultivate resilience, courage, discipline, kind of do the right things, but don't form worldly attachments with people or the world or pursuing things out there because they're just going to let you down. So you focus on within. This was summarized by the Christian thinker and philosopher G.K. Chesterton when he said, Epicureans made a god out of the world and sought to find their happiness in it. Stoicism gave up on the world because they found it too fleeting and focused on the God within. But you see, both people are trying to solve this issue of, is there happiness to be found? One said yes, and you find it in things of the world. The other one said no, in which case just plow within. And I think one of the things that's interesting is how enduring these two philosophies have been. Even if you don't know their names, they're around today. There's been a huge resurgence in a new wave of Stoicism in Silicon Valley, for example. Loads of writing about this. If you read the New York Times opinion columns, you would have seen this come up a number of times in the last couple of years. And Silicon Valley executives are saying, look, the key thing in life is to be resilient, to be successful, to marshal your inner life. And so don't form too many attachments with things out there. Don't pursue happiness. Just be a stoic. Kind of stiff upper lip, push on, and just marshal what you can. And in contrast, there's a new wave of Epicureanism as well. Here in New York, there's a philosopher on our doorstep called Catherine Weston. She's written a number of books about this, like The Pleasure Principle and How to Be an Epicurean Today. And she's lectures around some of the university campuses around here, and her books are pretty much bestsellers as well. So these ideas are still around today. Now, You might say, okay, so that's all kind of vaguely interesting maybe, Pete. We indulge your philosophy. Thanks for sharing. But what does this have to do with us? Well, look, I just suggest to you that this is how we all live. We basically start out in our 20s trying to find happiness in this life. And then how does that go for you? I mean, think of how a typical week goes. Maybe you wake up on Monday morning and you actually wake up before your alarm and you feel really refreshed, and you check your sleep app either on your phone or on your watch, and it says, congratulations, you had more sleep than average and you had a great amount of REM sleep, and so you should feel refreshed today. And you think, I actually do feel quite refreshed. So you bound out of bed, and since you got extra time, you maybe spend a little bit of extra time reading the Bible and praying that morning, so you feel pretty spiritually good about yourself. You've probably been more spiritual than people around you, so you feel a little bit smug about that. You don't say that, but that's just how you feel. And so you go off to work, and as you go to work, you have one of the really unusual days in New York, that as you come into the subway, you're approaching the turnstiles, you're getting ready for the battle, and then the most unusual thing happens. A New Yorker steps back and says, you first. You say, why, thank you. And so you go through the turnstiles first, and you get on the subway, and everyone's being really kind to one another. You're thinking, New York's really vibing today. This is good. So you go into work, and your meeting that you've been a little bit nervous about comes up straight early on at 9 a.m. and you knock it out the park. Compliments from your normally competitive colleagues, and you feel delightful and good, and the world is a sunny place. And even that annoying colleague who always asks too many questions, now today, because you're having such a good day, you've got time for him or her. And so you pause, you say, sure, ask me your questions. You take your time, you have a great rest of the day, go out for a few drinks at the end of the day, and you think, actually, maybe finding happiness in this world is not so bad. I'm not really sure why it is that Christians are talking that that's a fool's errand. And so you go to sleep. Tuesday comes around. Tuesday throws you a curveball. You sleep through your alarm. You wake up feeling groggy and heavy-headed. Actually, New York returns back to its normal warp and woof, that as you approach the turnstiles and you're fumbling around to try and get your phone out to scan through, suddenly everyone's bursting through and no one's letting you through. Some guy shoulder checks you as you kind of come through. You're trying to get onto the subway and it's hot and it's sweaty and people are griping at each other and calling each other out on different things. You get to work, your meeting goes terribly, your boss is really on you straight away, that annoying colleague is bugging you, and you just feel anxious about it. You think, I can't cope with this. And so come Wednesday, what do? You think, well, I can't ride this roller coaster. Some days feeling good and some days going down. So what do? You say, I'm just going to focus on myself. Trying to find happiness in this life is a fool's errand. And that's just with low-level things. We haven't even talked about things like disease and death and depression and despondency and debt, which come along. The reality is most people in their late teens and early 20s feel very optimistic about the possibility of finding happiness in this life. And the 20s come along, particularly in a city like New York, and they kind of smack you in the chops. And by your 30s, most people are a bit more cynical, a bit more hard-nosed, and have decided that actually Epicureanism was nice when I was young, but Stoicism is the path for me. That's often why it's so attractive, or its Eastern counterpart, Buddhism, is so attractive for a lot of people. And even if you're not following those philosophies explicitly, the idea of I shouldn't get too attached to things of this world or people because ultimately they let you down. I'm just going to focus on me, marshal my own inner resources. I'm going to do me and not get too attached. That is a very seductive philosophy. And you might say, well, okay, so what's the problem with that? Let's just, kind of focus on within and don't get too attached. Why the big problem? Well, the problem is that if you withdraw yourself from meaningful emotional attachments, you actually become less human. And actually, it has an impact on your heart. The desire to protect our hearts from being disappointed or let down or hurt is a very normal response. But unfortunately, if we do that, our world starts to shrink and our heart starts to shrink. Yeah, sure, we might not get hurt as much, but we kind of become anesthetized to the world. We don't feel as much either. We become a bit like the Grinch in Dr. Seuss's book. It could be his head wasn't screwed on just right. It could be his shoes were a few sizes too tight. But I think the most likely reason of all may have been that his heart was 2 sizes too small. A lot of people are walking around this world having tried to find happiness in it, deciding that's a fool's errand, and their hearts are shrinking as a result. Sure, you're not hurt very much, but there's not a lot of joy in your life anyway. But notice that Peter is talking about something different here, something very different. What does he say? Well, verse 6, he talks about a radical alternative. He says, in all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. See, first of all, Peter's a realist. He says that in this life there are all kinds of trials. And he's writing to Christians who are persecuted, but he's not just restricting to that. He's just saying life is tough. Disease happens. Loved ones die. People fall into debt. Things don't go your way. You lose your job. You might fall into financial insecurity. That's just life. It's always been that way. There are all kinds of trials, and they cause grief. But notice what he says, in all this, in all what? In all these trials and all this grief you experience, he says you rejoice. This is not some kind of sadist bent where you kind of say, well, I enjoy the pain. No, it's not that at all. Rather, this is saying that despite the difficulties you're experiencing, there is the possibility of joy. In other words, Christianity, properly understood, confounds both Epicureans and Stoics. Well, how so? Because it says to the Epicureans, your pursuit of happiness is far too fleeting. But Christianity offers something which the Epicureans know nothing about, which is joy even when life throws you a curveball. Even when life is difficult. It says it's possible to experience joy in the midst of the refining fire. And to the Stoics, it confounds them as well. Because it says, yeah, there are all kinds of trials. But actually, you can endure through those trials and experience joy at the same time. In other words, you can have an inner resilience, an inner poise that is the envy of the Stoics, and you can have a joy and a happiness that is the envy of the Epicureans. A joy in the midst of trials. That's what Christianity is talking about.